Hello and welcome to this episode of Hoi Polloi. I'm your host, Abidan Shah, and I'm really excited today to have Dr. John Mead with us, and we'll be talking to him in just a few moments. But just to give you a quick update, the summer is on, so we're doing our Digging Deep series again this summer, and it's about how we got the New Testament books. And so Dr. John Mead, he is from Phoenix Seminary, visiting professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, and he's been at Phoenix since 2012. Is that correct, Dr. John?
That is correct.
Okay. And he teaches courses in Hebrew language, Old Testament, Greek language and literature, biblical theology. Is there anything you don't teach?
I am the Old Testament department there, so...
Yeah, and textual criticism, which I love, and textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, and canon, and biblical theology. I mean, I'm very impressed. And you have presented papers at the ETS and the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies and SBL, so I'm really excited. But before we get into the academic stuff... Your family is here with you as well.
Yes, they are.
All right, tell us about what y'all been doing.
Yeah. Oh, man, we've been on one big adventure. So we arrived in Wake Forest in the middle of January.
In the cold and the snow?
In the cold and the snow.
From Phoenix.
So it felt like the cold and the snow. That's right. So my wife, Annie, and our 4 children arrived. And it's one big adventure. They love road trips. And
so what all have you guys been to? I know you went to the beach last week.
We went to Outer Banks last week.
Wow.
We got to visit Colonial Williamsburg and historic Jamestown earlier in the spring. So I went to college in Columbia International University in South Carolina.
So you know it's the old stomping ground for you.
A little bit, yeah. So we kind of showed the kids around there a little bit, and So, but mostly it's been about research and writing at Southeastern. So.
Wow. Well, so glad you were here.
Yep.
And now you and I met at the colloquium with Dr. Craig Evans. He was here promoting his movie.
Yes, he was.
and you were sitting on the same table with me, and something told me to go talk to this guy here. and I'm so glad I did. Yeah. And you were doing a talk the next day where we were headed to South Carolina for the regional ETS.
That's right.
And then you have another talk at the library. And that really intrigued me, so I came. And this one was with Dr. McKinnon, Dr. Kellum on the Canon.
Yes.
And so that's why you're here today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hey, it is my pleasure to be here.
So Canon it is. What is the Canon?
Well, Canon, what is the Canon? That's a great question. So Canon, brief etymology maybe is helpful. The canon, or the Greek word kanon, initially meant something like a reed that would grow along the side of the Nile River. From there, it started to have the meaning of a measuring rod or a measuring stick. Then it took on a bit more of a metaphorical meaning for like a rule, like a
standard.
Yes, a standard. Yep. Like so, in ancient Christianity, you might talk about the rule of faith. So that is what meets orthodoxy at this point. And then the last link in that chain would be, for canon, would be like a list of scriptural books.
Okay.
An exclusive list of authoritative books.
And when did this shift begin, or was there a shift? I mean, is there a genesis to this changing definition?
Great question. So canon as rule goes back to the 2nd century. But as far as I'm aware, there are no instances of the word canon meaning list of books until the 4th century with Athanasius around 350. He makes a statement. I'm trying to remember. I think it's in the Decrees of Nicaea. He wrote some commentaries on Nicaea, and he makes a passing comment about the Shepherd of Hermas and how it is not in the canon. He doesn't go on to list a bunch of books there in 350.
Just the concept is introduced.
But it does seem like he knows about the shepherd, of course. He's cited it a few times already in his career. And but he makes a statement that it's not in the canon, that is not in the list of books. Around 367, the same figure, Athanasius, puts together a festal letter announcing the date of Easter in 367, and there he does take the space and time to list out all of the books of the Old Testament and all the books of the New Testament.
And he does talk about it as a canon?
So he doesn't use the noun canon, but he does use the passive participle of canonizo to describe canonized books.
Okay. So,
and books that are not canonized.
So probably with Athanasius, or maybe pre-Athanasius, this idea began. Okay.
Yes, yeah. 350, I think, is the closest we're going to get, but probably beforehand. The first time you see evidence, of course, doesn't mean that's when anything was invented. It's just, that's the first time it's recorded.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I'm really excited about the book. Now, you have, along with Ed Gallagher, have written a book called The Biblical Canon List from Early Christianity, Text and Analysis, 2017, from Oxford University. That's pretty prestigious, from Oxford University Press. Now, they don't every day publish books. So this is a big deal. So where does the idea of canon list fit in? Now, on one of your in the introductory remarks, you say a comprehensive study of the use of Scripture in the early church will give attention not just to the list of books drawn up by early Christian writers, but also to the citations and the contents of ancient manuscripts. So there's a whole lot goes into the. Where does your book or the idea of canon list come in?
This is a great question. Clearly asked by someone who's read the book.
Oh, yes. I put it on Twitter. I tagged you. I said, look, I got my book. I want you on my podcast. So I'm ready.
I can tell. That is a very informed question. Ed Gallagher and I are of the persuasion that we don't make a hard argument in this book.
I noticed,
yeah. So what we're getting from me and sometimes from him and other writings is a bit more of a hard argument. But this book was intended to be neutral.
Right. Like a resource.
Yes, a resource, exactly. Here, if you just want the data of the lists, this is the place to go. So it's not a full canon history. For that, you still need F.F. Bruce, some of the works of Lee MacDonald, Roger Beckwith. Yes, they're stacked there on the desk. Bruce Metzger, of course, because they're taking citations and other things into account, whereas we're trying to focus on the lists. But I think, and Ed and I think, that the lists are the place, the particular piece of evidence where we get the most specific information on the canon.
Okay.
So if you want to know, say, what Athanasius or Origen thought the New Testament canon was or contained, you can actually go to their canon lists, and you won't have to guess, because they just tell you plainly.
Exactly.
Yes.
And what I love about your book is I don't have to turn to 50 resources to find it. I mean, it's all there. Mm-hmm. And the best part is each one of those lists begins with an introduction, a brief introduction, but it is very thorough and goes to the heart of that list. And so it's very, very helpful. I mean, I'm just so grateful, and I know a lot of scholars are as well, and lay people as well would be. Now, going back to the canon list for a few moments, typically it's been kind of in and out. At one time, canon lists were important, and then they were like, nah, that's not a big deal at all. And now it's like coming back in. So what's going on? Why has there been such a change in?
Yeah, great question. So if you read canon histories from, say, the late 19th century with Bishop, or B.F. Westcott.
Yeah, of course, standard.
Yeah, and the name of the German now escapes me.
Zahn, maybe?
Zahn, Theodor Zahn, that's right. Both of these scholars put together canon histories of the New Testament. I think Westcott's 7th edition was in the 1890s, something like this. Well, they are focusing on canon lists in those books. They touch on other things, but it's fascinating. The lists are actually the focus. Well, I think what's happened is in the 20th century, we saw an explosion of discoveries of manuscripts, not least of which would be, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran.
Yeah.
Or one thinks of the Nag Hammadi library being discovered for the New Testament and Christian studies. Also, what came to to the fore is patristic studies.
Right.
And how did a particular church father cite certain books, either from the traditional New Testament canon or say those books on the edges,
Right.
like the Shepherd of Hermas or the Epistle of Barnabas or something like this. So in the 20th century, manuscripts and citations of church fathers started to take more of a primacy in the discussion. But now what Ed and I are trying to say, and I think others are also coming to the same conclusion, is someone's functional canon, that is the canon they cite and the canon they read, may not actually equal their exclusive list of books.
Very interesting.
So in any particular church father who gives a canon list, rarely do you find citations from 2nd and 3rd John.
Very interesting.
And typically we've explained this by, well, they're brief, maybe they just weren't, cited or whatever. But a canon list will actually make clear that someone like Athanasius thinks that 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are part of the canon of Scripture.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas Athanasius himself, if I remember right, doesn't actually cite 2nd and 3rd John anywhere.
Wow. So if we go by that definition, I mean, throw it out.
That's
but
right.
That's not.
That's right.
Right. That's not true.
And part of the problem too is, like, say, for those general epistles or sometimes called Catholic epistles, especially the smaller ones, Jude, 2nd Peter, 2nd, 3rd John. There's not a lot of manuscript evidence for those in the early centuries.
Right.
In fact, some of what we learned first of these books comes from Origen in the middle of the 3rd century.
Wow.
Not from manuscripts or citations.
Exactly. So you guys are in a way scholars bringing in more of a cross or advocating a cross-disciplinary approach. That, guys, let's look at the canon list as well, and here's the resource.
That's right.
All right,
right.
So let the chips fall where they may, in a way.
So throw this back into the canon history and see how that works. So one of the studies we refer to in the introduction is by an early Bart Ehrman. He's still a student at Princeton under Metzger,
Right.
And he writes this article for Vigiliae Christianae on the New Testament canon of Didymus the Blind.
Right. Now, he did a whole the patristic writing on that.
Oh, yeah. And the article is fascinating. Because Didymus does not provide a canon list for us. But he wrote many, many commentaries, and those all kind of came to light in the middle to latter part of the 20th century. So Bart goes to work on determining the canon of Didymus, but he comes up with a canon that is nowhere mirrored or reflected anywhere else in canon lists. But his methodology is simply to rely on citations and usage. Now,
versus canon list.
Yeah, versus lists.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Wow.
So he winds up with, I think, an erroneous view of a canon of Didymus because he doesn't consult the catalogs.
Now, just offhand, do you remember what books did he exclude, or
I want to say it was some of the Catholic epistles, and then it was really interesting because I'm trying to remember which books from the Apostolic Fathers he thought were part of the canon of Didymus. I think the Shepherd for sure was one, but I think he even might have had some. I want to say works of Ignatius, or maybe he rules those out. He entertains it because Didymus cites the works of Ignatius.
Right.
And so the question is he citing them as scripture or canon? And I think Bart, I can't remember exactly, but I think Bart actually says he does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, some of the things I picked up from your book and then from the library talk at Southeastern is the role of the councils, whether it's the Jewish list or the Christian list, whether we're talking about the Council of Jamni or Yavne for the Jewish list or Nicaea. And your view was very, refreshing. And I've heard it before, but it was like, okay, thank you for saying that and going to the sources.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, I think it's time we, and recently you wrote an article for the Phoenix Seminary as well on the Council of Nicaea and Biblical Canon. So talk to us a little bit about the council and thinking that the council set the list.
Yes. Somewhere along the way in canon scholarship, and I can't pinpoint it exactly, but clearly somewhere along the way, the notion the notion occurred that there must be an authoritative body, a council, which decides upon the authoritative books for its community. And you're right, for Judaism, this was going back to at least the 1800s, perhaps before. This was the Council of Yavna, or the Council of Jamnia. But Jack Lewis in the 1960s wrote this 9-page article, 9 pages. Just powerful, because it was dealing with the sources. He dealt with the terms involved. He showed that this was not an authoritative council. This was like a school, an academy, maybe even a discussion.
That's crazy, because when I was doing my seminar on canon, it was Council of Jamnia.
Everywhere.
I mean, you throw that in and the debate ends.
Yep, that's right. I know. I
mean, we knew about the Council of Nicaea because no, that's not true, because we don't. But the Jamnia was like
it's bedrock.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah,
and there's nothing there in that sense.
That's right. Nope. I think I wrote this quick blog post for ETC, the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, also a month or so ago. It's Timothy Lim from the University of Edinburgh, works more in the Old Testament canon area, but he makes this sort of move towards this idea that the Christian canon was decided by a central authority. Now, he doesn't cite Nicaea, but usually that's in the background.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. That's right. Let the reader understand, right?
That's right.
So that's what got me to actually think about this blog post for Phoenix Seminary's blog, and that is, where did that idea come from? And it looks like there was just sort of this legendary telling of the proceedings at Nicaea, found in a 9th century Greek manuscript.
Wow.
Where something was said along the lines of, here's all the books that we have, let's pray over them, and the ones that wind up on top of the desk are our canon, and the ones that wind up underneath are our apocrypha.
Really?
Yes, 9th century Greek manuscript. But it's also locating it at Nicaea, and so
maybe the guy came to clean the desk and dropped some.
This is bizarre.
How do you know for sure?
It's a total miracle story.
Wow.
Yeah, and so so what happens is eventually the philosopher Voltaire,
who loved to bash Christianity.
Just loved to bash everything traditional and authoritative, and so he actually includes this story in his dictionary of philosophy,
right?
On councils.
And so, does he actually say that this is where it began?
Cites that version.
Wow.
He doesn't know where it comes from, I don't think.
And then we as Christians take it and say, well, there you go.
Well, it made it into such a prominent source and resource in the 17th century or 18th century, and then it winds up just everywhere.
Wow.
I mean, Dan Brown for the
Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. Totally latches onto this. I don't know if Dan Brown knows where it comes from.
Well, there's a whole lot Dan Brown doesn't know
course.
that he hasn't made up.
No
but hey,
question.
he made a book.
But I thought
and a
to
movie.
myself, at first I thought he had no basis, but now I see a little bit how that myth got propagated and developed.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean for us? So, based on the fact that the councils haven't decided, how would you say canon came about? I mean, and I know it's it's a big question, but the best you can.
Yes. Okay. So here's, if I can just approach it from the list standpoint.
Okay.
Okay. I think some Christians are put off a little bit. They're a little dismayed when they hear that, it wasn't a council that established the books.
Right.
They almost think like that would have been a strength. Because that would have been the one place where it was all settled, right, by the Spirit.
Right. All the holy men came together.
That's
and they,
right. And I think there was some comfort in that.
Yes.
But when you tell them that's not the way it happened, I think they'll, they have to rethink things.
Right.
Well, what I would say is the 18 or so New Testament canon lists in our book, up to 405, are representative of different Christians from different times and in different places. And they all agree on a core canon. There are just enough disagreements to show me this wasn't a conspiracy theory.
Exactly.
And
yes.
that-
It actually buttresses our argument, then goes
Yes,
against. Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So it wasn't a bunch of bishops getting all into the same room and pounding it out at one time.
Right.
Rather, if we put the eyes of faith on now, I think we can actually see maybe providence at work. And so someone like Pope Innocent I, or the author of the Muratorian fragment, no matter where you date that, and Origen and Athanasius, they all wind up with 4 Gospels. They all wind up with Acts. And they all wind up with at least 13, or most of the time 14 epistles of Paul, if you include Hebrews in that corpus. And early on, Revelation was agreed upon. The book of Revelation was agreed upon. It went through kind of an interesting reception history. And they would all agree on at least 1 John and 1 Peter, and most times James.
Okay.
But there are differences with the Catholic epistles.
Of course.
That do seem to be ironed out by the end of the 4th century. So I look at that and I go, wow. So with the exception of the fuzzy edges, these canon lists from different people, different times, different places.
Somehow, without a council,
Exactly.
they were on the same page.
They wind up with very similar contents.
Right. Now, the issue comes more towards the Old Testament canon side of things, where we have books, call them deuterocanonical books.
Or apocryphal.
Or
That's
apocryphal.
fine. That's right. Happy with either.
What do you do with those? The New Testament part, we see, okay, these epistles and extra gospels, they were not accepted. But go to the Old Testament, there's a different story there.
Right.
So what do we do with that?
Yeah. So the Old Testament canon. So that's a complicated one.
Yeah, that is a big one.
So yeah, I think so.
Then the funny thing is, last week I began the New Testament canon studies, but I began with the Old Testament canon. I said, guys, just to let you know, let's get this out of the way, because I know there are a lot of questions in your mind, and I'm calling John Mead.
That's right. So I think still, to deal with the Christian Old Testament, we have to back up and talk about the Jewish canon.
Exactly.
Okay. The clearest statement of an exclusive catalog of books is from Josephus, around 95 AD,
right,
where he talks about how Jews have only 22 books that are rightly trusted.
Right.
Okay. He then says there are other books that we've used that record the story, that is, of the Jewish people, but they are not afforded the same trust.
Right.
And we're left to guess, because he doesn't name them, but we're left to guess he means books like, say, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, where he relies upon those books to tell the story of the Antiochus Epiphanes and the Seleucid reign in the land.
Right.
He's heavily dependent upon those books. But I like it, it's interesting, he notes a distinction between books trusted, between the lawgiver and Artaxerxes, which would be like Esther, I think.
Sure.
And then books we use but are not afforded the same trust.
And I love the way you described it in that discussion. You talked about the fount and the stream. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so with Josephus, then we see a canon of only 22 books. And then we see other books that are apparently useful in some way,
right,
but not afforded the same trust.
Right.
Fast forward now to some of our early Christian testimonies on this. And you wind up with what we might call a trifold description of religious literature, where someone like Athanasius, in that same 39th Festal letter, he describes the canonical books, lists them out. He mentions the category of Apocrypha. He doesn't have any good things to say about that. But,
of course.
But when he uses that term, he must mean books like the Gospel of Thomas, or what we sometimes refer to as the Gnostic Gospels.
Sure.
Dangerous writings, forgeries, etc. Then he shifts back to this middle category of books, where he talks about how they're not canonized, but they were prescribed by the fathers to be read to new converts or catechumens.
Good gracious! I think we should keep them away, right?
I
mean, you would think that's what we would say. It's like, oh no, don't read those.
Why
those
would
are
we
horrible.
expose the new convert to Tobit, Judith, Shepherd of Hermas, right?
Yeah.
Like those are the types of books he goes on to mention. And yet he thinks. So there's three levels there, right? There's the canonized, there's the apocryphal, and then there's these books to be read
in the middle.
And that's what the earliest tradition of Christianity does with those books that we call deuterocanonical or apocryphal. They put them in this middle category, neither canonical nor apocryphal. And they read them for edification. And but they do not base doctrine on them. I think that's kind of the key distinction. So you see a very similar discussion in Jerome's description. He'll list the canonical books. He will talk about apocryphal books, but then he will also talk about those same apocryphal deuterocanonical books.
Right.
And he's very explicit. These are read in our churches for edification only, but no point of the faith or no point of doctrine is based upon them.
Okay, so there's that fount versus a stream. They're in the stream.
Yeah, that's right.
But they're not as good as the fount.
They illustrate piety or true religion, but they are not like inherently true religion, if I can put it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, we talked a lot today.
Yeah.
and I really want to encourage our readers to check out this book. It's on Amazon, Biblical Canon List from Early Christianity, Texts and Analysis by Ed Gallagher and John Mead. It's from Oxford University Press. Very reasonably priced, actually.
Yeah, I think it's $31 now on Amazon.
Yeah, I was expecting more. So, I mean, I'm really pleased with the price. And the notes are the best part for me as a scholar. I love the copious notes and having all these lists in one place. So it goes on my canon shelf. As you can see, I have all my major canon books from Bruce Metzger. I got Thomas book it all there.
Check that out. Yes.
Yeah, I'm working on reading that, and Hill and Metzger.
That's right.
And Kruger there as well. But
absolutely.
So now Meade goes on it as well.
All right.
So what's in store for you? What's happening next? What are your next projects?
Yeah, great question. So I also work in the area of Old Testament textual criticism.
Yes, tell us about that. I love hearing about Old Testament. I'm a New Testament guy.
Yeah. Well, in particular on something called the Hexapla that Origen put together. It was a 6-columned Bible that probably wasn't copied very much because it was a monstrosity and it would have required
only Origen could do something like that.
Too many animal skins. I know, that's right. That's right. So, but what he did is he compiled the revisions of the Septuagint of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. I and a team of international scholars are working to put together critical editions of the fragments of Origen's Hexapla. So I've just submitted about a month ago my critical edition for Job 22 through 42. That'll come out with Pater's Publishers.
Okay.
It will not be as reasonably priced as the Canon List book, but that will give the researcher access to how Jews were reading the Hebrew Bible in Greek in the 1st and 2nd centuries.
Wow.
So in many ways, the versions of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion are actually closer to the time of the New Testament authors than the Septuagint.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
So we're going to keep working on that project.
Okay. Yep. All right. We're really, really excited to have you here with us and look forward to having you again. And again, any further thoughts? And before we close, anything you want to share with our readers or listeners that would benefit them?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions or make any comments, go to Hoi Polloi tweet and let us know. And we will we'll be glad to contact Dr. John Mead and let him know about it and have him interact and let us know any way we can serve you better. Thank you so much for joining us today.